All right, we are about 12 noon. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of our Teaching and Learning Center. You found your way to our Teaching and Learning Center Professional Development Series. We meet in real time at noon on Wednesdays over the course of the semester. We also have all of these events archived on our website for asynchronous viewing later. So when you hear the wonderful stuff today and you need to share it with colleagues, we'll have opportunity for you to do that. If you come to enough of our events, do some surveys and things like that, you can become a professional development certificate earner. And my colleagues have just dropped that information into the chat. If you're interested in not only increasing the excellence of your own teaching, but helping others increase theirs, you can become a TLC fellow. And actually, one of our presenter today, Melissa Glaser, is one of our TLC fellows. So we're very excited to have Melissa here for her presentation today. Before we get to that, we're going to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm going to give a bunch of announcements, and then we'll turn it over to Melissa. So Ash, land acknowledgement, please.
Yes. All right, are you seeing what I want you to see? Perfect. Great. Okay, here we go.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilize the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
these truths
because we still remember.
Thank you. Next week, we have a wonderful event by Colby Merberg on open education resources. Many of you are very much aware of the rising cost of educational materials, textbooks, and the like. So Colby Merberg is going to talk to us about ways that we can potentially keep some of those costs down and keep the quality of our materials up. So we're very excited for Colby to be presenting next week. We also have a number of other things to kind of put on your radar. Number one, at 1:30 today, if you're interested, I am doing a talk on writing excellent teaching statements for the Kansas Postdoc Association, and we can drop some information for you about that in the chat. It's happening over Zoom. On Tuesday, March 19th at 3:30 in Hale Library, and again, we'll drop this information for you in the chat here for a second. In the Hemisphere Room, a guest speaker named Mutali Kande will be presenting on what ChatGPT doesn't tell you. Which is obviously a very timely presentation for the state of higher ed right now. So definitely recommend that event. And then Andy Faber will be presenting on Friday, March 29th from 3 to 5 p.m. in the Leadership Studies Town Hall on fostering multiculturalism for the 21st century through an ungrading pedagogy. And Andy is amazing. And if you've been part of our series before, you know Andy. Andy's here right now. Andy's fantastic people. And we're very excited for that presentation coming up. And for the ones that haven't happened, next time we're going to continue to announce as we go forward. We'll put this out over our social media too. I think those are my announcements, and now we're ready for the main event. We are very excited for Melissa Glaser to be here, and Melissa's going to be talking to us about supporting student workers, small shifts that make large impacts in college success. And Melissa is also a very common attender and common presenter in our series, and we're very excited to have you, Melissa. Thank you so much for your time, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you to everyone who's making time out of your day. It's always busy, so thank you for being here. And if someone's watching this recording, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I really appreciate it. I'm going to get my screen share ready, make sure everything is good with that. All right, does it look the way that it should here? Okay, perfect. Let me get things set up on my end just a little bit here. All right, so Dawn's already shared the title of my talk, so we'll just move straight into it. I'm going to start by giving you an agenda and telling me what we're going to talk about. So very, very briefly, just so you know a little bit about me, I'll share a tiny bit about my teaching and supervising experiences. I'll talk about why student workers need support. I'm sure we come up with lots of reasons, but there's additional ones I want to share. What the value of work is. This is a really big one. If you walk away with nothing else today, I hope you walk away believing that students who work get a lot of value out of their work. It's not just because college is expensive and it's a paycheck. That's definitely a part of it, but there's so much more they get out of work. And then the bulk of what we'll spend our time talking about is shifts that we can make in the classroom and working with students, and the mindsets that we have about work and the behaviors that we have with students, and the way we design our courses. And then we'll talk a little bit about the impacts of those shifts on students. I'll wrap up with just a few tips for supervisors, not the focus of today's session, but I'll share a few of those as well. So a little bit about me with teaching and supervising. I've taught student success courses over the years. I've provided individualized support for writing through a number of programs. I was an instructor for the English department, so I've taught writing and literature courses. And I also have taught and continue to teach for K-State First, working with a lot of first-year students. So that's kind of my teaching experience and background. In terms of supervising, I used to work for a program for K-State that no longer exists. It was called the Pilots Program. So if you've heard of it, you've been here for a while. Nothing to do with aviation, but I supervised peer assistants. I had about 25, 30 undergraduate and graduate students that I supervised and trained. Through K-State First, I'm not an official supervisor for learning assistants. That's K-State First, but since I work with learning assistants in my role, I have one each year that I act as sort of a faculty supervisor for. And then my main role, that's my current full-time position, is with recruitment and admissions here at K-State, and I oversee our enrollment management service team. So that's 7 students currently and 1 full-time staff member. I started that in May. So I'm coming up on about a year of experience with supervision being my main gig. And so I've really learned a lot about how supervision works from the work standpoint, and I wanted to bring that back into my classroom teaching experience and share with you all. So really quick, just drop into the chat what your role is. Do you teach? Do you supervise? Do you do both, or do something else? So just want to kind of get an idea here what people do. And just go ahead and head into when we've got supervise, teach, and both, mentoring, supervise and teaching, teach and mentor. Great. So we've got and a few more coming in. We've got a great mixture. So there'll be some opportunities throughout this presentation to add ideas. So if you're someone who's here hoping to get ideas for your classroom, that's a lot of what we're focusing on. If you're a supervisor or you do both, I hope you can add your additional ideas throughout from your own experiences, because I certainly don't have all the answers. But looking forward to this. I wanted to know, I figured we'd probably have a mixture of people here today. All right, so mentioned kind of my current role and title as well, but those are the things I'm currently doing, just kind of distinguishing from past experiences there. Okay, so let's focus a little bit on why student workers need support at all. So, sorry, Zoom trouble. All right, there's a lot of challenges that student workers face. And one thing that I want to point out, kind of the overarching thing, is that they lack a positive support system. So certainly we support our student workers in a lot of ways, but there isn't something really formally in place for them the way we do for other really busy students. For example, our student athletes. Love our student athletes. They do have a lot of support and structure provided for them, but sometimes students who work are just as busy as our student athletes, and there's not really a formalized support system for them because they're spread out everywhere, as opposed to members of a particular athletic team. So being able to provide that support as a supervisor, as an instructor, both, is really super important for these students. As you know, as we know, they have really high demands on their time because they're working and doing school, among other things. They've really got that full class schedule between school and work. Part of what this means is that they have less flexibility for studying at times that are ideal for them, or they're able to focus more. Maybe they have to work at times when their brain's really able to focus and be sharp, and so they have to study at times when maybe they're tired or they're stressed and they wouldn't necessarily choose, but that's when work is available. So that's something for us to keep in mind. They might end up doing last minute work closer to deadlines because they lack the time, not necessarily just due to procrastinating, but I've had 3 days to do it, but I've been working those 3 days. And so I set aside this 4 hours before the deadline to finish something. That's when I've got time. So they don't have as much control over doing things in advance sometimes. Students might also have more than one job. They might have other commitments outside of jobs as well. One or two of my students actually 3 people on my staff have additional jobs outside of their job here. So that's something that definitely can happen as well. And because of these high demands on their time, they might lack involvement or time for involvement in other activities, social activities, or other ways of getting involved as a student because they've got to dedicate so much time to their studies and to their work. Along with this, when you're that busy, you're going to have higher stress, but there's additional sources of stress for these students. Financial stress is probably one of them. Chances are if a student is working, it's because they need to do so to afford college, and they're thinking about finances more often as well. So that's going to lead to some higher stress, just kind of that constant hum in the background of being able to pay for things. They might have work-related stress. The job itself may have some stress related to it, whether that's something about the nature of the job or the people they work with, but there might be some stress related to the job itself. Of course, they'll have academic stress just like any other student. They might have family or social or personal stress. And then for these students that do something else regularly, there's a constant shifting between environments. For lots of our students, but especially for student workers, they might be going back and forth, especially on campus, work, class, back to work, social thing, back home, back to work. So that constant shifting and transitioning is just hard on human. They might have different roles or tasks they're shifting between. They might have different groups of people they're shifting between. So that's kind of a mindset challenge. And I've written here a social energy challenge. That's kind of my way of saying this might be harder for students who identify as being introverted because it really kind of draws down their social battery to have to change and shift constantly and work with different people. Even if they love people, they might be even more drained by those constant shifts between things. So real quick, put in the chat, what are some additional reasons that you think that student workers need support? So go ahead and just type those and add those. I'll read those aloud so that people can hear additional things, reasons why students might need our support. All right, Andy shares because they're human and human things happen to them. Absolutely. Angela writes, they want different types of support outside the home. They might want support at workplace or at school, for sure. Dawn shares the imposter phenomenon. Yep, a lot of us can identify with that too. All right. If additional ideas come in, I'll come back to those, but for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and move on to talking about the next topic, which is the value of work. So like I said at the beginning, if you walk away with anything today, I hope you walk away knowing and having a greater understanding of how valuable work is to students, so much more than a paycheck. But we are going to start there, because work just simply may be necessary for students to obtain an education. It's just kind of the way things are. We all know college is expensive. But I also want to point out this really is an issue of equity and accessibility to education. So many of our students, especially lower and middle income students, they may not be able to afford to come to college without working. And a lot of our non-traditional students are already working and then obtaining an education alongside of that. So it's just necessary for them to be able to do, but thinking in terms of equity can sometimes be a helpful paradigm shift. So college is expensive. That's not news to anybody. But unless you've done the calculation lately, you may or may not have an idea how expensive it is. So in the back of your mind, I want you to think how much you think it costs for 4 years of college for in-state and out-of-state. Just ballpark figure, keep that in the back of your mind, and then I'll share some numbers with you. I've got the source down below. So I've provided in-state and out-of-state tuition and fees. There's a million different ways of calculating costs, but I focused on Manhattan undergraduate students. Not talking about international students, and there's different fees associated with different things, but just kind of your typical undergrad Manhattan campus student. In-state for 120 credit hours, so the total for graduation, $47,000. Out of state, over 113. And that's, of course, if a student doesn't take anything extra, which probably doesn't happen super often. Students change majors or add minors or add certificates or things like that. So this is kind of a bare minimum there. Estimated books and supplies for 4 years is over $4,000. And then we've got to talk about housing as well as the dining costs or food costs. So these are just for 1 year. The median cost from this source is over $12,000 for 1 year, and then off campus, an average estimated cost is over $9,000. So I'm going to share the total cost for 4 years for both in-state and out-of-state in just a moment. And the way that I calculated housing and food for that is 1 year in the residence halls and then 3 years off campus. That's what most students do. So I just kind of went with typical here. Keeping in mind the totals I'm about to show you do not include transportation. They don't include entertainment. They don't include clothing or soap and toilet paper. It's just tuition, fees, books, and then housing and food. So this is kind of minimal. It's actually more expensive. So 4 years without anything else added on to it, over $100,000 for in-state students and over $167,000 for out-of-state students. If you divide that by 4, that's about $25,000 a year, about $42,000 a year just for that. So just kind of getting an idea of just how expensive college is. And of course, scholarships and financial aid help, but without students working, sometimes that just isn't feasible. So another way of looking at knowing why it's necessary for students is looking at evidence of need. I know there's a lot of text on this slide here, but this is from Kat's Cupboard. And the part I want to highlight is at the very bottom in bold. Almost 40% of the surveyed participants at K-State reported food insecurity at low or very low. So that's a really big chunk of our students who are worried about even just food. And so even higher if we've got food might be okay, but other things are a concern. So we're talking about a pretty substantial group of our students who finance is a driving factor here. So that's one of them, but I want to really expand our thinking and talk about the value of work outside of the paycheck, because it is so much more than that. So I've got this Albert Einstein quote: education's not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And I think as educators, we would all agree, absolutely. We don't want our students just to walk out here with facts. We want them to have critical thinking skills and communication skills and all sorts of other things. So what I want to highlight is that students really can gain those things from their work, and that work can be an integral part of a student's education. So even though we know so much learning happens outside of the classroom, when we're teaching a class, reminding ourselves of this can be really important to do, and thinking the goal of gaining a college education is absolutely about their studies and academics, but what else they experience while they're here. And work can really be an integral and important and valuable part of the education they gain while they're at K-State. So they can gain additional skills and knowledge. That's going to help them while they're here as well in their academics. It's also going to help them long-term in their career. So when they're at work, they're going to gain communication skills, leadership skills, increased self-awareness, time and energy management, because working requires them, it adds structure to their day and their week and some consistency if they have a consistent work schedule. And then of course they have to have a lot of discipline to make sure they can get everything done. So they learn that time and energy management. They get preparation for the real world through just having the nature of having additional demands. Although some of my students, I've talked to a lot of my student workers for a lot of their feedback here for this presentation today. And they talked about, it's really busy, but it may or may not be busier than the real world. It depends on that student's life, but they won't be in school once they graduate necessarily. So they may be able to focus full-time on work, whereas now they're split between work and school. Work can also enhance their problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, experience with diverse populations. So that may even just be they're not around students all the time, or people who are in their major or who are close to their age or their background. They might gain experience with software. Here in recruitment and admissions, we use a customer relationship management tool. We also use Microsoft Teams. They might have others. There's lots of software they might have access to. They may have a job and experience with customer service, whether that's in person or over the phone. And they might gain other professional development skills. They might have networking and lots of other additional experiences in a student's education. So they get so much more than a paycheck out of their job. It'll depend on the job, but guarantee they'll earn some of these from that. Work can also offer support needed to obtain an education. So outside of what they'll learn, their job can provide them with social support, emotional support, and academic support, which if students have all of these things, they're much more likely to be retained and to stay on to their second year, third year, and to graduate and to be successful while they're here if they have these kinds of support. So a couple of things that work can offer, it can offer a strong sense of community. It gives students a place to belong, and it really has that high social value for students. It allows them to build these relationships with coworkers and supervisors, and loneliness is just a huge thing right now for lots of people. So being able to have a place where people belong and where they work and feel like they're important and people know who they are can really help with that decreased loneliness. Work can be a service kind of a third space. If our first and second place is our school and home for students, this gives them a third space to belong and to interact with people. And that can be really important for a student to have that additional support. They might also have additional resources through their work. The students they work with themselves, their coworkers, as well as supervisors can be direct sources of support, but they might also be able to refer them to other sources of support from experience or knowledge they have. Working can give students a strong sense of purpose. It can really help them realize how valued they are and give them a place to contribute in meaningful ways. On-campus jobs can offer things like connection with other students as well as faculty and staff. And oftentimes they can offer that convenience and flexibility of working around their class schedule and being convenient to be right here on campus. And off-campus jobs can offer that connection with the Manhattan and surrounding community that students might find harder to come by, but it gets them off campus and interacting with people. So talked about a lot of the values of work. So in the chat, just type when you're ready. I'd love to hear from you all. What additional value do you think work offers students? It could be about anything, absolutely anything. Okay, I'm seeing self-efficacy from Dawn. Self-worth from Andy. They learn stuff they won't learn in class. Gives them time management experience, an unofficial mentor with their supervisor. Exposure to others' perspectives and experiences, absolutely. A lot of my students here in recruitment and admissions interact with other students, but lots of other supervisors. Exposure to others' cultures, definitely. Or an official mentor, yes. Perfect. So lots and lots of benefits to work. And if we look at this list and we think, do we value these things as educators? I think absolutely we do. And so, I'm going to come to this and be real honest and say a lot of times when I had students who worked, my attitude was kind of, gosh, if they just didn't work so much, they would do better. And I've really rethought that, thinking there may be instances where time working, maybe if a student cuts back, it would help them, but they do gain so many other things from it that looking at it in a nuanced way is really important. All right, so here's kind of the bulk of what we'll be talking about today. The shifts that we need to have in mindset, in our behaviors, and in our course design, and then kind of how those shifts can impact students. And some of these things you're already doing. So hopefully it's reinforcing the importance of doing these things. And some of them might be things that you haven't considered or that you've thought about but haven't quite implemented, and this is a nice reminder. So I'll start by talking about the three of these in general, and then we'll talk about them each in turn. So some questions to ask ourselves, especially in terms of mindset. What attitudes and judgments do we have about students working? Do we need to change any of those, adopt additional ones, question our thinking, maybe just add some nuance? What knowledge and awareness do we have about students' work experiences? How can we expand our understanding? We might have our own direct experience with that, with the students we know, but what other kinds of experiences do students have working that we haven't just asked them and talked to them? Our behaviors, which these are things we think about already, but trying to think through a lens of working with student workers. How do we interact with students inside and outside the classroom? And then course design. How might our course requirements and expectations affect students? What policies are best? And of course, we think about these all the time, but really thinking about them, thinking, okay, if a student is working a lot. And I'll mention this at the end too, but any of the changes that we make that will benefit student workers, the good news is that is going to benefit all students, because all of our students are busy with lots of different things. And so these changes are really great to make. They won't hurt other students. They should be beneficial for everybody. So I want to start by talking about our mindset. So the way that we think impacts our students. We definitely need to communicate our positive mindsets, but the way that we think, students will pick up on that and know that. So part of it is just knowing many students work out of need and or out of choice. And I think we know that in general, but do we know that about our specific students? Do we know which of our students work? There's a reason if we have a student athlete in our class that we're aware they're a student athlete so we can work with them and support them. Same thing with students working. They may or may not tell us, so it's really helpful for us to know. Large lecture hall, quick raise of hands, maybe getting to know students individually, especially in smaller classrooms, finding out, do they work? Where do you work? How much do you work? That kind of a thing. Value students' work and recognize the benefits. That's why I spent time talking about that to start with today. Remembering students have many commitments out of class and value all of them. So work as well as additional commitments the students might have. So when I talked to my student workers and said, what do you wish instructors would do? What's helpful to you in a job? What's helpful to you in class? One of the things that they said was just recognize we have a lot going on and that value those things, that they're not getting in the way of success, that they're just a part of that educational experience. This is a big one too. Just trust that students who are busy are doing their best to be responsible. Of course, students make mistakes. That's part of our learning process as young learners, but they're doing their best to be responsible. They're not just, setting things aside. They're really trying hard. They just have more responsibilities. A big one is to realize that work schedules might be out of a student's control. So you're going to have differences in workplace on campus and off, different supervisors' philosophies. And it may or may not be an ideal work situation. A student finding out what their schedule is might be Sunday night and they find out when they're working Monday through Friday. It might be different every week. It might be the same. They may or may not have control over the work schedule. So just recognizing that can be really helpful for students to know. You recognize that they may not be able to have control over that. My students also talk to me about not wanting special treatment. They just want support that allows for success. So they don't expect for them to be treated differently than anyone else or for standards to be lower. They just want to know, how can I succeed? A lot of that comes from asking students questions, really truly listening to them and striving to understand what it is that they need. This was also really important to my student workers, that as instructors, we maintain high expectations and that we believe in our students to meet them. They want to rise to the occasion. They want to do things that are rigorous. They want to learn and be here. So keep those expectations high and believe that they can rise to meet them. Sometimes students who are working, gosh, they're tired, gosh, they're stressed, along with a lot of our other students, right? So anything we can do to provide motivation and energy is really helpful because they are just tired and stressed and they're trying their best to motivate themselves, but anything we can do to add to that and help them keep persevering in their hard work is really helpful. And then above all else, all of these things might be views that we have that students pick up on, but we also need to communicate our views to students being supportive, so that they know we feel this way and we believe these things. All right, shifting now to behaviors and how they impact our students. Number one, be available. This was big for all of my student workers. What does it mean to be available? Respond to emails when you get them. A lot of times they say, I've emailed and nobody responded. So just making sure we respond to those and then tell them when to expect responses. If you don't respond to emails evenings or weekends, but you tell them, they really appreciate that. If it's 24 to 48 hours, great, then they know what to expect. Office hours, as much as possible, making sure you don't just offer them twice a week and those are the only times. Offer them by appointment so they can come in and see you when their work schedule allows, or offer them many choices. And just kind of a side note, calling them student hours so students know this is the time for students to come. It's not your time to work in the office. Approachability was really good too. Thinking about, do students feel like they can come and talk to me? So what does that mean? Sometimes students need to be told, I want you to reach out to me. I want you to talk to me. I have a couple of students on my staff that are really shy and quiet. And even though I've been here almost a year, are hesitant to ask me questions. And I always say, come ask me questions. And they still need to be told, please come talk to me. The same is true in the classroom. They need to be encouraged to reach out, especially those shyer, quieter students. Really communicate to students, I'm here to help you. I want to help you, and say that just clearly and directly to them, that that's what you see as part of your job. Be friendly and have an open demeanor. So you don't necessarily have to have a bubbly personality if that's not your thing, but maybe you just have a calm manner. Maybe you really are listening. Maybe you just know your students' names and say hello, but make sure that they see you as someone who's open to talking to them. Remain open to questions that they have and suggestions that they have, so that they know if they come to you again, you're going to listen to them. And really get to know your students as much as possible. So what this means in terms of our students, just asking them if they work, show curiosity about their job. Remember, if you can, hey, how was work at this place? Do you like working there? How are things going at work? How are things with your coworkers? What do you get out of your job? So really talk to them and show interest. This was a specific suggestion from one of my very busy students, especially in his major. Notice if a student misses class and say something. He had an instructor do that and really appreciate it. Hey, I noticed you missed class, glad you're back today. Or if their behavior changes drastically or if they're struggling, send them an email or talk to them next class period and just say, hey, I noticed this. How are things going? And they really appreciate that. If you ever have class material or assignments that can relate to work experiences, encourage students to make that connection. Even if you ask them, here's something we're talking about. Do any of you have an experience in your working life that relates to this? And then have them share. That's really meaningful for students to make those connections. Another kind of key behavior is to really offer empathy and flexibility to our students. So I'll kind of go into what that means. When students make reasonable requests, if you can accommodate them and they're reasonable, go for it. And not all students will ask for accommodation, so really be proactive in offering those flexible options to all students. Maybe one student asks for an accommodation, you think, you know what, I could offer that to everybody and say, hey, everyone, just so you know, if you need an extra 2 hours on this deadline, just let me know. I'm happy to offer that to you. It's fair, it's consistent, and it helps improve your course. Communicating growth mindset to your students so they know you expect mistakes and you realize that mistakes are valuable for learning. So a mistake might even be, I messed up my work schedule and I was late for class. That's okay. Or, oh, I didn't do as well on this assignment. I've been working more than usual. Okay, let's talk about a plan for balancing work and life. Instead of feeling like they've done something wrong, it's an opportunity for learning and for growth. Just recognizing the impacts of work on a student's schedule and life can be helpful. Honestly, these students just want to be heard and seen. Even if you don't change anything, if you just know what they're going through, that actually really helps them feel supported. Allow for a wide variety of engagement in class. So thinking back about, we've got people who are busy, who are tired, who are stressed, who may be introverted with a lower social battery by the time they get to your class. Really don't limit engagement just to who's speaking up and talking. If you do call on students, which I think can be a very positive thing, let them know, if I call on you and you don't want to talk, you can pass for any reason. That allows students to know that it really is a choice for them. I do this when I teach, and very seldomly do students pass, but if they do, it's really actually helpful to them and to their classmates to know, oh, it's okay to pass sometimes. Recognize active listening as engagement. I'm a pretty high energy, extroverted person. I've been sitting in on a class this semester, and there are times when even I get there and think, I really just kind of want to listen today. I don't want to talk a whole lot. And that's someone who's really used to talking and enjoys talking. So for those other students, recognize if they're present and they're really listening, that's engagement as well. It's okay if they don't always talk. And consider really both introverts and extroverts when designing your class activities and giving them both a chance to feel comfortable and belong and to learn. And then just kind of going back to this, engage students by encouraging them to relate their ideas to work experiences and course content. Sometimes they might have to do the work. Sometimes you might be able to make the connection for them, but if that's possible, it's a great thing to do. Last, this may be just kind of a silly thing, but bring food to class. All students love food. So if it's in your budget or possible, it's a really great way to support students, especially when we're thinking about food insecurity, having a snack that can add to their energy and just feeling cared about and taken care of. All right, before I move on to course design, because I know I've done a lot of talking, real quickly in the chat, type one idea that you've seen me talk about that you think that you either already do or want to do or are thinking about that you think would be really important. So I'll repeat that question for you all. Just in the chat, one idea about our mindsets or behaviors that you think would be really helpful for supporting student workers and students in general. Okay, we've got snacks, food for meal breaks, overall empathy, empathy and flexibility, incorporating students' ideas into applications of course content. Discuss campus resources to support students such as Cat's Cupboard, PowerCat Financial, assist with connecting them to resources, definitely. In addition to food, stretch, and movement breaks, yes. Open communication, excellent. I'll give another 20 seconds or so, and then if anything comes in after that, I'll come back to it later. Another chime in for movement breaks. Poll on workers, positive attitude toward working and other activities outside learning. Okay, excellent. All right, course design. Something we spend a lot of time thinking about how we design our courses and our assignments and our policies and all sorts of things. So I want to start by talking about just general expectations and goals that we have. One of the things I want to mention is to think about the culture that exists in your department or even your college level, as well as your field of study or your class, and really continue to evaluate if that culture is best for students. Some cultures are really high rigor, high expectation, fast, busy. We expect you to stay up late. We expect you to be here. That may be the best culture for students, but sometimes we forget to go back and reevaluate. Is the culture that exists, is that really best for our students? If not, do we need to make a very small shift? Do we need to make big changes? Do we need to talk about it? Is the culture consistent among all faculty and staff members? Do we have a divide here? Have we outwardly discussed the culture that exists? Have we agreed on it and been intentional about it? So this is something that's bigger than one person. It has to be a lot of communication and collaboration, but really continue evaluating if the culture within your field or department or college is what you believe is best for students, and if not, enacting some change. Excuse me. Along with that culture, make sure that those culture and expectations are known, accepted, and supported by students. Students often want rigor. They're often proud of being in a difficult field or something that's demanding, or that they're going to be really well prepared for their future. So it's not that students just want something easy, but make sure that they know what's expected to them and that they really fully support it, that there's student buy-in about what that culture and expectations are. When you set those expectations inside your classroom or at a bigger level, make sure they're reasonable, communicate them clearly with students, and then hold students accountable. They really want to be held accountable to those expectations. They just need flexibility when it's possible. And then when you're flexible or they ask for accommodation or you offer it, communicate what those acceptable ranges are for meeting expectations. It's rarely super, super narrow. There might be a wider range, but let them know anywhere from here to here is acceptable. So letting them know is because they want to meet those expectations. Remember, most students do put academics first. They're here for college. They're not here to work a job. Otherwise, they would just take time and work. But they're here for school and they do want to put them first. So they just need that flexibility and understanding so they can succeed in both places, in academics and in their work. With course materials, so you might remember it was about $4,000 on average for books and supplies for 4 years of college. Couple things to consider when designing courses. Whenever possible, if you can, avoid requiring expensive materials. Sometimes that's what's needed. But if it can be avoided and students can still learn what they need to, it's good to avoid those and to consider those costs. And then when not, help them access more affordable options whenever possible, or to share materials with one another. That can help cut down on the costs for students. And even just being aware of the cost and making sure that's what it has to be for them to learn so that it's not just forgotten. If you're a person who uses a textbook that gets updated on occasion, really determine if that new edition justifies the higher cost. Compare the old version to the new version. And if it really does justify the cost, sometimes a new edition is what's needed. But if the additional cost to students and the lack of availability of used copies isn't something that works, or it's just a much more expensive edition than the other one, and it really is going to provide the same learning outcome, maybe consider sticking with the version that already exists so that students can share those resources with one another or find more affordable options there. In terms of deadlines, all of this is just about flexibility, but I'm going to be a little more specific here. So one of the things that really helps busy students is to just give them as much time as possible to complete their assignments. And the bigger the assignment is, the more time that they need so that they can plan. Make sure that your instructions are clear, they're thorough, they're detailed. They're not just presented in class. They're also something that students can access outside of class, whether that's through Canvas or some other way, and that they have that information well ahead of deadlines, because they're trying to figure out how to meet those expectations and complete the assignment. And if they have more time, they can do a better job on that. If you can, offer flexible deadlines or give a time and date range. Between Wednesday and Thursday, this is due. Maybe give them grace periods. It's due 11:59 p.m. Tuesday night, but if you turn it in by Wednesday at 11 a.m., no penalty whatsoever. I've used this with my classes. Most students want to meet the deadline. It saves me a lot of back and forth with emails if I give an automatic grace period. It avoids a lot of cheating and academic dishonesty because students have that built-in extra time. It allows them to finish up or give it one more look in the morning when they're fresh and have had a good night's sleep. Lots of benefits to grace periods. Offer extensions proactively to everyone. I know this might be kind of an extreme view, but I've had really good luck with it in my classes saying, if you need more time, let me know and I will give you an extension. Let me know how much more you would like. Surprisingly to me, the vast majority of my students wanted to meet the deadline I set, be done with it. Most that asked for an extension asked for 24 hours or less. They just needed a little bit more. And occasionally students would ask for a bit more. If I wasn't going to grade it that quickly, I didn't have a problem with it, and it was fair because the extension was offered to everyone. It was a win-win. And then with deadlines in general, remember the purpose of deadlines and make decisions accordingly. So of course, we want for our students to learn how to meet a deadline, but they get so much practice with that in 4 years of college that thinking about your individual course and your individual deadlines and think, what else does the purpose of this deadline serve? It keeps students on track. It keeps them accountable. You don't want them to fall behind in their work so that if this deadline moves forward, so does the next one. It's so that we can grade things and get them back in a timely fashion. But if an extra, 5 hours or 24 hours still allows a student to meet those goals, maybe an extension isn't that big of a deal. And then just recognize the real world has flexible deadlines. Of course, there's high deadlines in the real world, but there are flexible deadlines and extensions in the real world too. So it's okay if we are flexible with our students. And then ensure you're available for questions before assignments are due. So if you're someone who gives a Sunday 11:59 p.m. deadline, but you don't want to answer questions over the weekend, that may be a deadline to reconsider. Maybe having it due on Monday at noon is better because then you can answer those questions Monday morning. So just consider your own availability, what you're willing to give to students, because again, they may not be procrastinating. It may be that's the time they have to work on something. So setting it up so that if you do have students' questions before an assignment's due, it's a time you want to be able to provide support. And then avoid having several assignments due at the same time or date. Sometimes it's helpful for structure for students, but sometimes it just piles it up and then they're not doing their best work because it's crammed in. Excuse me. At the same time, maintain a consistent deadline schedule for smaller regular assignments. So if you have lots of smaller regular assignments, having them due at a regular time and date, maybe the night before class or always on Wednesdays, can be really helpful for students when they're balancing a lot on their plate with the schedule. With large assignments that you don't necessarily want to be flexible on the deadline, you might consider having optional or flexible little check-in assignments to help them stay on track. Turn in 2 pages of this 10-page paper, turn in your sources, turn in a draft, turn in a partial project, that type of thing to help them with their time management, because we're here to help them learn and practice time management and get better at it as well. But maybe those are the flexible check-ins when the final project is a hard deadline. With attendance policies, have a clear policy and make it reasonable so students can plan. There's lots of differences in range and reasonable, but as long as it's in the range of reasonable and students know it, that's helpful to them. And then minimize out of class requirements or offer flexibility or alternatives. So if you have something outside of class you're requiring, make sure it really is important and that there is some flexibility or alternatives if students can't go. Last bit on course design, and then I'd let some feedback from you all about course design. When you're considering your assignments, avoid any assignments that may be busy work. I know this is something we're probably doing already, but the expectations and definitions of what makes busy work, there's probably a little bit less wiggle room here with students whose time is really taken up by work. They're more likely to call something busy work than if they weren't already with a full schedule. So really make sure, do they need to do this to meet the learning outcome or not? Even if it's valuable, do they need to do that quantity of it, or can things be cut? Consider the frequency of your assignments as well as low or high stakes. There's benefits and drawbacks to both because they all relate to time management and stress in terms of, well, this is worth a lot, so it's high stress, but it also takes a lot of time. Or those low stakes assignment, gosh, I'm always having homework for this class. It's hard to fit it in, even though it's not worth very much. So just consider that there isn't a one size fits all answer here. Just make sure your decisions are intentional. This isn't for everyone, but if you've never considered contract grading or giving choices in assignments or determining, I don't want homework to count towards my grade, I just want exams to count. Is that an option? Or these are 2 assignments, you can do both of them for 10% or one of them for 20%, but it's bigger. If it works for your class to give choices or to cut things down, then that's something to consider. Anytime you can relate assignments to what students are already doing at work, that's really helpful. It helps them make connections they might not make otherwise, and it doesn't add an additional burden to their time. They're still doing the assignment, they might just have context from work when that's possible. Group projects. This is a huge one for my students. This is probably one of the most important course design decisions for talking about busy students. And this will probably be controversial, but I really want to encourage you to consider alternatives to group projects unless having it as a group project really is necessary, or if the benefits to a group project outweigh the cost of group projects, because there are always costs with group projects. If the benefits outweigh it, go for it. Or if it really absolutely has to be done, go for it. But if it's an option that you're just considering that could be done very effectively another way, and it's not going to be as beneficial, maybe not just jumping to a group project. Make sure you've really, really thought about it if you do group projects. And I know group projects need to happen. Just make sure it's yours that needs to happen. If you have those group projects, keeping the group smaller makes a huge difference. I have a couple students doing group projects. They have 6 group members. Trying to coordinate 6 schedules for very busy students is difficult. And what ends up happening is that my student workers, they know I'm a flexible supervisor, so they end up taking time off of work to do their group projects, but they can't make up that work because their schedule's already full, so they're losing out on their paycheck. So it's quite possible that when assigning a group project that requires time outside of class is happening, that you're actually costing students money. That's why I started with bullet point 1. If it's necessary or the benefits outweigh it, sometimes that's just what needs to happen. But if the groups are smaller, it really works better for scheduling needs. It's much easier for students to coordinate their schedule with 1 or 2 classmates than it is with 5 or 6. When possible, give time in class, at the very least, for students to communicate with their group members, touch base, make plans to get together and schedule things so that they're not doing that outside of class. It's so much faster and more efficient. Or give them time in class for working. Is there a day that you can put a lecture online? Is there a day you can move something to a Canvas discussion board and just dedicate that time in class? That class time is super valuable. It is the one time that all the group members are guaranteed to have available to them at the same time. That may be worth moving some things around to give that group time for students for group projects. Avoid requiring out-of-class meetings at specific times. So they may need to meet outside of class, but doing it at specific times isn't something that they planned for. So giving some flexibility for when they need to meet outside of class is important. Make sure you check in with your groups to ensure that all members are contributing. It can be really stressful for students if they have someone who's not contributing. So if you check in, hey, is everyone contributing? You can help encourage students who aren't contributing, hey, you need to get on it. And then along those same lines, give students the opportunity to share feedback about group members. Knowing it's built in, you will be sharing feedback about your group members can hold students accountable. So that ends up lowering the stress and workload on students who are doing the work and make sure people contribute equally. And then one thing to consider is consider giving individual grades to students rather than group grades. There may be a time and place for group grades, but that can be an additional stress for students. So consider that if that works well for your class and for your assignment. All right, so in the chat, go ahead and add what additional shifts in these areas might help students. I know we already talked a little bit about mindset and behavior. Feel free to add additional ideas for those if you wish, but we've also been focusing on course design. So what additional shifts in course design might help students? And then I've also got a note from the previous prompt open education resources presentation next week to help keep those costs down for students for course materials. Yes. Okay, having some ideas come in, keep typing and I'll read those. Make sure to include metacognitive practice to help students work more efficiently and effectively. Absolutely, metacognition, helping them recognize how they're thinking and what's working and what's not. I love your thoughts on group projects. I think we need to be very careful with these. I think we should allow for individual voices to shine in our students' work. I'll give about 15 more seconds in case anyone's typing, but I'll come back if there's any additional ideas for mindset, behavior, and course design that can help students. Keep assignments as short as they can be. I know sometimes Don assigns maximums for assignment length in his classes. And really thinking, what can students do? What do they really need to do in their coursework to meet those learning outcomes? Because we don't want to decrease rigor, have students not learn as much. They don't want that either, but what is it that they really need to do to demonstrate learning? All right. Streamlining is a win-win, yes. All right, so some impacts on students when we adopt these different changes. Small shifts can have really big impacts, and some are smaller than others for sure, but none of these are asking you to completely change everything you're doing. And a lot of them I hope you're already doing, of course, and know that people are. So we make these small shifts, students are going to be more successful academically, which was a huge top priority, absolutely. That's going to lead to student retention and graduation so that they can earn that degree for sure. But it's also going to help prepare them for their full career in lots of different ways outside of their academic studies. We'll have better relationships with our students when we implement these things, which is good for us and for them. Lowered stress and improved mental health, which I know we talk about all the time. Students have increased motivation to do well when we provide support for them. Providing a framework of support really catalyzes the possibilities for success. So if we really are intentional about this, this can really increase the possibilities there. And this reinforces a holistic approach. A lot of us take a holistic approach to teaching and teaching the whole student. And so if we recognize that so many students work and have other time commitments and obligations, it's really treating them as a whole person and not just as an academic student. And all of these changes, like I said before, they'll support all students, not just student workers. So they're good for everyone. All right, so what additional ways might small shifts make large impact on students? So this is another opportunity to share in the chat, especially if you're someone who supervises students. What have you seen impact students positively, being able to have a job and being supported in their work? How does that impact students positively? Don writes, these make us facilitators in support of our students explicitly and changes the whole dynamics of our interactions. Because there may or may not be, there's a lot of things that you all are probably already doing or thinking about doing or doing that you're like, I can just emphasize that more. But if we're really explicit and intentional about these things, then students are more aware of it. So even if there's something you're already doing, telling students, I'm doing this because I support you. I know you're busy. I know you work. I know you have all these commitments. That's really meaningful to students. So even if you already know that, think about how you can even increase your communication of that, whether that's in class, in your syllabus, sending an email to students, whatever is meaningful for you. Pam writes, online classes offer flexibility. Absolutely. Noah writes, as you noted earlier, I think explicitly acknowledging, emphasizing with students' busy and stressful schedules means a lot to them. Absolutely. People want to be seen and heard and known, hey, this is hard and I believe in you, you can do it, kind of thing. Barb writes, being supportive as a supervisor can help normalize self-care and well-being, making it okay to prioritize this. Yes, we want students to be able to take care of themselves and prioritize their well-being. So if we do that and we encourage them, that makes a world of difference. Absolutely. Carrie writes, it creates an environment of compassion that we all share with each other, helps everyone stay more motivated when feeling cared for. Yes, compassion is super, super important for our students because they are, as I think Andy said earlier, they are human beings doing human things. Yes. All right. If anything else comes in, I'll come back to the chat. I do want to get to a few tips for supervisors and give you all who supervise students a chance to add some additional tips. Like I said, I don't know everything, but if you supervise student workers, a couple things I encourage. Communicate to them academics are top priority. It is perfectly fine and wonderful to tell your students school comes first, work comes second, and they can still be a good, responsible worker. Set their schedules if possible, definitely based on classes, but maybe based on exams or studying and telling them, hey, when's a good study time for you? Maybe let's set your work schedule so that you can focus on studies during this other time, not just on when you need students. It's a balance, right? But talking to students about what works best for them and making sure that the schedule they're setting with you is thinking about studying. Sometimes students think about that and sometimes they don't. So encouraging them, hey, let's not have you scheduled to work if that's a really good time for you to study and I can make that happen. Whenever possible, give them their schedules well in advance for planning purposes. If you can do that for the full semester, amazing. If you have to do it on a weekly basis, do it at a regular time and you've got good reasons why you have to do it on a weekly basis, do as best you can to share in advance so they can plan. If work is done, let students study at work when it's possible. And encourage that by saying it's okay if you work on homework if X, Y, and Z is done, if the nature of your work allows for that. Honor requests for time off within a clear attendance policy. So my personal philosophy is if students ask for time off work and I can give it to them, I always say yes, because the consequences already, they won't be paid for their time. So I don't need to provide any additional motivation outside of that. But I do have an attendance policy so that if students are asking for an exorbitant amount of time off, there's a process in place. Email me if you're interested. I'm happy to share my policy with you. I just won't take time for it today. But if you have an attendance policy that works for you in terms of how much time off is allowed, that could be really helpful because students want to meet those expectations too. Creating a supportive environment as a supervisor is super important because if we want students to have the benefits of a good job, we have to provide those benefits as a supervisor. So part of our job is to build community, allow students to socialize within reason, of course, but small chatting is fine. We want that ourselves as people who work. Encouraging friendships among students, recognizing that the fact that they work is just going to limit their time for social needs, whether that's time with family, friends, the community, time to rest or time alone, recognizing that and seeing how can I work with that? And part of that is saying, well, let's have a social aspect to this job within a professional reason. Know your students really well, know them professionally on their job, but also know how they're doing academically, know how they're doing personally, and know that they have different values and needs from one another and know what those are so you can meet those needs and address those values. You can provide support and constructive feedback on how they're doing on the job, super important to give them that. Provide them with professional development, not only for what they do on the job, but also for their future. So if we're an integral part of their education here, think about what their long-term goals are and support them in that, even if it doesn't directly relate to the job that they're doing for you. If you have the opportunity to approve this and give them raises and let them work extra time if they want to and can pick up extra shifts, that can help them in a financial way if you're in a position to do that. And just like in class, provide food at work if at all possible. That's really, really valuable to just a supportive environment, as well as students being hungry and busy and running out of time to eat sometimes, or that kind of thing. So in the chat, whether you're a supervisor or just have an idea, what else can supervisors do to support student workers so that we as supervisors can be a part of that important educational experience? We've got ask questions and listen. We've got try to recognize students through their work through thank you notes and award nominations. Yes, I love that idea. There's student workers, we can nominate them for the University Student Employee of the Year Award, or you might even have departmental awards, or even just within your own division to recognize them or write a note. Encouragement notes, birthday cards, love these ideas. Open communication and listening to more than just work conversation. 100% students need to talk about additional things as well. I know we've got about 1 minute left, so if something else comes in the chat, I'll come back, but I want to leave with 3 key takeaways because I know I provided a lot, and I will share the PowerPoint with the Teaching and Learning Center. They can post this later, so if you want access to it later, you'll be able to see the whole thing. But number 1, value students' work experiences. They're extremely valuable, know what their value is, and communicate that value to students. Be flexible, whatever possible, and keep your standards high. We just need to offer those students support and be proactive about offering that support so that if they ask, we provide it, but if not, they get that. Whoops. So thank you all so much for taking the time to be here today or to watch this recording. I've got my email address right here, as well as where I'm located here on campus. So I'm always happy to have conversations, love to meet people for coffee and exchange more ideas. So if you're interested in doing that at any point as a teacher or supervisor, would love to meet and talk with you more. Or if you just want to send an email or ask questions, be happy to answer those. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for wonderful stuff. I think one of the things you had said on one of your nearer to the end slides is that really your talk could have been supporting students, not just student workers, because there are so many things that you did that do generalize universally to all of our students, and I really do appreciate that perspective. Thank you so much for sharing the slides. Please let your colleagues know this will be posted on our website. That'll probably be up there later today. We have a post-event survey that you can complete. We also have a professional development certificate available, and I dropped an announcement for some of those events that I announced at the beginning of our talk today. Next week, we'll have open education resources with Colby Merberg. I want to thank one more time Melissa Glaser for being here today, sharing that wonderful perspective. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and hopefully we'll see you next week. I hope you have a great